everyone. Thank you for coming to view my presentation and talk. For those of you who caught me yesterday, I'm going to expand on a lot of the things that I showed briefly. But I was really thinking about what it is that what could I present to a room full of SketchUp experts, considering I'm not a SketchUp expert. And I was trying to think about what would be most poignant, interesting, exciting, and cool. And I think that's basically to reflect on the last sort of 10 or so years I've had in the film industry. Because I'm certainly not going to stand here and tell you how to do the modeling. When you already know it, that is. So this is 3D modeling for concept art, designing with SketchUp for the big screen. My name is Chris Rosewarne. As it says here, I had a background in practical special effects and prop making, and I soon left that. I think I had about sort of 4 years as a prop maker in the industry before I moved over into a cleaner and, let's say, healthier environment in the art department, where I've been for like the past 15 years. This is a little splashboard of film titles that I've been involved in during that time. And it's been an interesting career path because I actually got in, I was talking to Liam about this, and I'm actually a 2D illustrator. I would consider myself a 2D illustrator, concept artist, and I kind of started using 3D as it was introduced to me by the art directors that I was meeting on these projects. And for those of you who do know me and my work, this is my online presence, and I get known for really pushing the abilities, or certainly the output of what you can achieve in SketchUp. This is what I get asked all the time, and it's something I've really been thinking about, and it's not something that I regrettably can come up with an answer for that I can put onto a USB key or give you some ninja tip or to use a plugin. And I was really thinking about this, and I'm just going to digress here. And I added these slides in this morning because I'm trying to think about what is the answer to that, considering that what I do in SketchUp, you could learn on like the first 2 pages of how to model in SketchUp. And there's about 4 or 5 procedures in SketchUp that I use and repeat. And I do that a lot. And I demonstrated them in the class yesterday for those of you who are interested. And I think to the shock of many people, my knowledge of SketchUp is actually really, really limited. But I get it to do what I want it to do. So I think I'll have to go back into my youth a little bit to answer that question. And I used to watch a lot of movies that were really inappropriate for me at that age. But they had a lasting effect. And I absolutely loved these movies. And I would watch the movie, and then I would draw what I'd seen all the time. And I was drawing the RoboCop suit and the Ed 209. I used to draw that pulse rifle all the time. I'd also draw this power loader. I was absolutely obsessed with that power loader. And this was from a time when you couldn't look on the internet. There was no internet, and you had to rely on images that you would find in books to use as reference. So I would always be pulling from my mind and trying to remember how that looked and moved on the screen. Cut to, this is me when I was about 25. This is in a really cold workshop in the Czech Republic in Prague when I was working on the movie Doom. And it was actually my first job as a concept artist because I was just coming off the back of being a prop maker. And I was trying to get into the art department. And I was lucky enough to meet with a set decorator who said that he wasn't allowed to bring out any English crew. And at the time, I had a Czech girlfriend, so I was living there. And he said, well, this is fantastic. I can pay you your rate out of my budget, but could you design this stuff and then run the prop shop for me? And because I'd already got like a foot in both areas, I said, sure. What could go wrong? Thankfully, nothing did, but there were some moments. And this is the picture on the left is me and a good friend and work colleague. He's actually a storyboard artist now called Kurt van der Basch. And we were asked last minute to come up with a rig to pump blood through one of these silicon animal hearts that were going to be in this animal lab. And I would design these stasis tubes. I designed them on the fly, like just on the back of a piece of A4 paper. And I knew how to make those shapes as I was drawing them. I knew how to put stuff on on the circular saw and how to cut a radius on a circular saw, how to angle things and how to drill holes, and that I knew we could set LED lights into them, how to cut up that tube, how to waterproof them. Having kept fish for years, I knew that how to put lights in and put an aquarium aerator. So they were actually really, really interesting props, but I'm pulling from the back, pulling from knowledge that I've obtained kind of over the years, as well as stuff like this. And I touched on this yesterday. You know, I'm going to say it properly. Who still plays with Lego? Yeah. So part of doing prop making is kit bashing at times. And for Doom, we bought in a few hundred BB guns, a load of medical equipment, computer parts, and we just had this stockpile of stuff. And I would be given a brief of like, here's this weapons room. We need to fill it full of some stuff. Can you make some things out of these parts? And so this is me. You can see here I've got 2 BB guns. I've got a medical defibrillator. I've got a canteen, I think, food trolley stand. And that's a military detonating device on the top, as well as some cables and hoses attached underneath. And I didn't know really what I was building, but through playing, you know, holding these guns, I'm thinking, well, maybe it could be like a plasma welder. What does a plasma welder look like? I don't know, but I can make it look like it does something. And I would pull from my years of being a special effects technician and using welders and having to step over cables and stuff, and what do they feel like and what do they look like to use. And then with a lick of paint, it transforms from being a kit bash prop to being something that sits into a set. And especially that thing of, there's a little trick of just adding a light to something brings it alive. So like all the props we were doing, I had this electrician, and I just build something and say to him, like, can you just put a little LED light in there for me? That's all it needed. And suddenly the thing would sit there and would have life. So this is my answer to that early question. How do I do what I do? A childhood love of movies, being in art school for years and learning design fundamentals, proportion, design, perspective, sketching, drawing, having practical experience of building stuff, an interest in industrial design. I love diggers and robots, and not to mention Lego, because you are exercising the creative part of your brain as well as being very, very tactile and turning things over in your hand. And in a way, SketchUp is an extension of that for me. This is digital Lego for me. Now, am I modeling this correctly? Certainly not. And I think those of you who have seen some of my modeling techniques would testify to that. However, it gets me where I want to be really, really quickly. Really, really quickly. And this is what I'm paid to do. Not so much this part, but I'm paid to produce that. My employees don't really care how I got there. So this is a digital pencil. It's a tool along the road of getting to one of these final images. So going back to my workflow, which is predominantly modeling in SketchUp and exporting or importing into Keyshot, which is a real-time renderer, and it handles it handles SketchUp geometry very, very well. It's drag and drop materials, uses a dome HDRI to create lighting, and I'm not a render guy, so in a way, just the ability to open a program, drag on a paint material or a metal material suits me fine, and just to have a render like that is fantastic. And then because of my background as a 2D illustrator, and this was the kind of thing that I would do before I got into modeling, SketchUp and Keyshot just make my process faster and a little more accurate and a little more photorealistic if I wanted to push it that far. But I think, Keyshot, as with many software, as with many programs, does have its limitation, but what I can't get in the software, I can do in Photoshop. I can paint over stuff, I can correct stuff, because I'm designing. My mind isn't caught up in the intricacies of a model. If I've got glitches and artifacts in a render, no problem. This came out with a white background, and I knew I wanted a desert background in the back behind it, and I would start compositing photo textures in and painting in what wasn't there. So these are some of my early designs in SketchUp. Not my early designs, but when I started publishing a lot of this stuff online, I couldn't show a lot of the film work that I was doing. So I started replicating what I was doing on film in my personal time so I could publish them online. And actually, long story short, that's how I'm here, was because I started posting these on Instagram, on social media, tagging SketchUp and Keyshot. And it's amazing. And I just got onto the platform, and I described it as like I do one of these models, and I do a render, and you kind of throw it out like a stone into a pond with these tags. And you'd wait for a bit, and they come back as like, bing, SketchUp like your post. Keyshot like your post. Keyshot reposted your post. SketchUp reposted your post. In come the followers. And so there's this really nice kind of cyclical cycle, which is sort of like, oh, well, let me do another one. Throw that out there. And this following builds. And so I became known as the kind of the SketchUp robot guy. So as I'm doing this stuff, I know that I can push it past the render into something that I want to see. And in a way, I don't like the fact that a render could kind of sort of cheat me out of being able to paint stuff. I love painting. I love drawing. I love illustrating. And to have it just come out done is kind of handy when you're kind of rushed and you've got to get stuff in front of a director or a producer. But I want to get in there and I want to paint stuff. This is what I got into the business to do. So there's always about kind of 20 to 30% of painting that I will do on top of my renders. So I'm going to go through some design briefs that I was involved in with these projects. Again, not because they were amazing models, but because I think they were an interesting experience, and I think I'd like to share them with you. So the first one is Skyfall and the sniper rifle. And the prop master for Skyfall came up to me and said, well, look, there's a scene in the script where Patrice, the assassin, unfolds a sniper rifle from his briefcase, kind of classic James Bond gadget. Let's start. And again, something I don't like, the brief was too wide, because where'd you begin? And there's no end of weapon designs on the internet, and how do you make something cool and interesting? You kind of need some limitations. And so I was kind of flailing about for a little while until I met with the armorer. He said, look, what we're going to do is actually take a donor weapon, which is this accuracy international sniper rifle. But it's really interesting when you remove the plastic cowling. And the benefit of using a live weapon is that it can fire blank rounds. So, and it's completely safe to do so. So this is fantastic. This was a fantastic base to start with. So here I am kind of working out how can this be deconstructed and folded into a briefcase, as well as reverse engineered into it coming out and looking like a kit of parts that form into a sniper rifle. And again, I'm just doing this in Photoshop as trying to work out the process of how this could happen. And I'm emailing these to the armorer as a communication of ideas of what I wanted it to do. And I was thinking well, if it's a sniper rifle, then it needs a scope. But how do you hide a scope? It's got to be this covert briefcase. I was like, well, it'd be kind of cool if the handle turned into the scope. And this is something I encourage with art students as well, is to ask yourself that question. Wouldn't it be cool? Because you used to do that with kids when you'd hold toys and you'd go, oh man, I wish it did this. And to try and capitalize on that little, it's kind of like that. That's the lightning in a bottle moment. That's you designing there. Everything else is process. So in a way, what they're paying me to do, ultimately, if you could boil it down, my designing is going, it'd be really cool if it did this. I know how to draw, I know how to model, I know how to render, I know how to do all this. But it's given birth in that moment where I'm trying to think how can it perform this? So here it is. Again, these are just Photoshop concepts explaining the deconstruction of this prop. And one of my first SketchUp models. And I was leaning on one of the art directors trying to figure out how to do this. And it took me like a day and a half to do it, which is really embarrassing because it's all boxes, it's all primitive shapes. But it was something, and I didn't have a render. But it didn't matter because I knew how to paint. So this was just to help me explore sort of views and the functionality of it and how it would break down into that suitcase shape. Because there were other little things of like, well, how do you hide a trigger? And we were playing out ideas of like this guy going through customs and trying to explain the trigger shape on his briefcase. So I made it as a ring. So again, didn't have a renderer, but was able to paint this in Photoshop. And then the payoff is when you get to go to the cinema to see it and see if they kept those details and if it was actually made it into the edit. You know, did they use that idea of the extendable scope? Did we see it? And I knew it was going to be shot against an LED screen, so the silhouette of it was really important as well. I think it worked quite well. So, next one, Guardians of the Galaxy. Hands up who saw this movie. It's a good one, right? I was really pleased when that came out, because sometimes a movie can come out and you sort of cringe a bit when you admit to having worked on it. But this one was really great, and you get, it was really nice to have this sort of public positive feedback, and people were happy and sort of excited to meet someone that was involved in this movie. And I'm going to walk you through a similar sort of process. So we had to come up with ideas for Quill's pistols. And the production designer was, his background was actually as a furniture restorer. So he was really big on kind of the patina and a tactile finish to everything. And he didn't want stuff to be clean. And he really liked the idea of me putting heat color distortion down the side of the metal. And I came up with this idea based on the character's background from having been a boy in the 70s. What did you think was cool in the 70s? And it would have been like, he would have been playing with Hot Wheels cars and hot rods where they exposed the engine. So I had an idea that where he would take his pistol and he would pull the cowling off and kind of replace the engine of his gun. And a bit like the hot rods, would leave the cover off because it was this badass engine in there. And we were torn between the two designs. Started to lean towards this one a little bit more. And again, I'm starting to get a bit more confident in SketchUp, and I can use it to explore the shape and also kind of communicate ideas with the prop shop. And again, I'm not in Keyshot at this point. I'm still using Podium for some basic lighting passes. This is me assigning the materials in SketchUp. This is a Podium render, but again, I know I can push it in Photoshop to get what I wanted. And again, this is my that's my paint over. This is the paint over of that podium render. And again, the production designer is big on it looking like it had been used. So we really had to go to town with the scratches and heat distortions and stuff. And it got turned into a Nerf gun. Sorry? Yes. Well, it's funny. It's actually the second Nerf gun I have. I was involved in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy as a prop maker, and I sort of designed and built Marvin's gun. And part of the marketing team got that made as a Nerf gun as well. So ironically, this is my second one. Although I have a colleague, a friend of mine, who was designing all the guns for Star Wars, and they've basically replicated all of those as Nerf guns. So he beat me, unfortunately. But then it's really cool to then see this around, and even in the new Avengers: Infinity War, you see the gun a lot, and it's really nice as a thing to see on the screen. This is another one. I was designing the tanks that it was supposed to be this hybrid of the Chitauri alien tech fused with human weaponry. And so I had to design these tanks. And I think I downloaded a tank from the SketchUp warehouse and basically pulled the top off it and started cladding onto it. And I'm using this is Podium giving me a clay render. And I would export a black and white screenshot of just the model white with the black lines, and I would put it on top of the clay render in Photoshop, set that layer to multiply, and so you've got the shading underneath, but you've retained the black line art. And this was a style that I used to get a lot of the poly modelers coming in saying, this is a render, but how have you got the black line art on top of it? And it was something that the designers and the art directors liked, because you could really delineate all the details. And again, I could push it further. This isn't a render, but I could paint this up traditionally in Photoshop. I was also involved in doing these anti-aircraft guns. That were on screen for about a second and a half, so much so I've slowed down this clip. 2 weeks I was on this thing. And he misses Iron Man, so it was
get bodies to the jet. The sooner we're gone, the better. You and Stark secure the Scepter. Copy that. It's like they're lining up. Well, they're excited.
My tank!
Find the Scepter.
So I got to do some other cool things, which were like designing robotic arms in Stark's lab. And this was about the time that I'm really starting to get into doing components, and I'm developing a bit of my sort of robotic style here. And the drawing on the left, that's actually the Photoshop concept art that I started with, got approved, and then I started modeling. And it was around this time that I then discovered Keyshot. Fortunately enough, I was working with a young concept artist, and there's a great quote, which is, if you're the best person in the room, you're in the wrong room. And I'm a big fan of learning from other people, and exposing yourself to others who are better than you is a fantastic way to improve. And he introduced me to Keyshot, and we all know what happened after that. So it's something that I really took to. So this is around about the time that I start posting all those robot designs. So this is the next design brief. This is in Spectre, and I was asked to design a laser microphone that Bond would be watching his target with and listening to what they were saying. So it had to have what looked like a laser and then some lenses. So I modeled this up in SketchUp. I don't know why I keep saying that. That's quite obvious, isn't it? But the director was really big on something looking utilitarian. And my first design of this, I'm not going to show you, but it belongs on ArtStation in the fantasy section. And I had to really understand that the film was not about my laser microphone. And it really needed to be more of a utilitarian prop that didn't jump up and down for attention. I think I had it with like a mechanized lens that folded off, and it would have completely drawn your attention away from the scene. So sometimes it's not all about me as much as I would like to argue otherwise. So again, my workflow now, so modeling in SketchUp, providing these key shot renders. And another little cool trick is to basically switch off perspective, use the command and then the number keys to get these side and top elevations, export them as grabs, or I just take a screen grab actually, it's quicker, bring them into Photoshop, and if you've got a white background, you can set the layer to multiply, which means that the white goes invisible and you retain the black. If you've got a darker background, press Command I in Photoshop, it'll invert that, and it'll give you a white on black image. So these are really, really helpful for passing on to prop makers. Oh, there we go. Here's the example. So darker background. Here's an inversion of that elevation. Yes?
How detailed do you get? So from this going into the next step of, say, do you break down the drawings of like actual build plans?
No, I pass this on to the prop makers, because it's then kind of it's not my territory to be concerned about how it's made. Although I do consider it, and that's why prop masters like to employ me, because I do think ahead a little bit. But this is such this is such an easy prop for them to build. So I wasn't too concerned with this.
Ben arrivato, signor Schiarra. Spero abbia fatto buon viaggio.
So you see the design just sits there. It performs a function. It's no moving parts, no articulation. It just tells the story. That was a really quite important lesson to learn, actually.
Quando facciamo scoppiare lo stadio?
This is the next one. This is the smart blood injector in Spectre that we see. Same technique. I just went straight in to build this thing in SketchUp, knowing that the director wanted to keep something that was very utilitarian, looked like it had been designed and made in a workshop. And I assigned different colors to different parts of the model, knowing that when I assign the materials in SketchUp, that particular material in Keyshot, that particular material in Keyshot will then go to all the parts of the model that have that particular color. And this is how I present most of my work, with the render and then the elevations on the side. Partly because it does help perform a function of giving an indication of scale and elevation, but it's compositionally it also helps to flesh out the page as well. So I'm able to give my model down to the guys in the workshop. They tend to work in CAD programs. So this guy in particular was using Rhino, but he would deconstruct my SketchUp model and send the parts off to get machined. And it would come back with this kit of parts and assemble it. And they had to be mechanized, because when you press that button, the liquid had to disappear. But again, I don't have to worry about that, because that's the prop maker's job. Machined out of aluminum, anodized. So I tend to think in advance of what those materials are going to be, and I will assign them in Keyshot.
Ah, 007.
Q?
Please excuse the mess. Everything's a little bit up in the air, what with the changes and all. Couple of things to get through. Shall we get started? Just relax. That's it, lovely. Now, you may feel a small... Christ! Prick.
What is it?
Cutting-edge nanotechnology. Smart blood. Microchips in your bloodstream allows us to track your movements in the field. You see those readouts? We can monitor your vital signs from anywhere on the planet.
That sounds marvelous.
Call it a post-Mexico insurance policy. By direct order of M.
So 3D geometry for painting in Photoshop. So I'm not always doing props. I am also doing environments and sets and interiors. And one thing we had to do was Q's lab, and he was going to have these bays where there were going to be different things being worked on, and a little nod to the fans. We were going to start building the, is that a DB5? DB5, yeah, I think it's a DB5. Didn't want to get that wrong. So this is what this is what I would usually get from an art director, and this kind of takes me back to my pre-render days of I would have to breathe life into that in the illustration, was what they used to call it, because they couldn't present that to the producer or the director. So I got this from the art director of the set, and I started working with the set dresser to basically, what was the dressing, what was the props, what were we going to put in there. And I started building a lot of that in SketchUp, some stuff I could download from the warehouse. What I couldn't find, I knew I was going to paint. I would do a very, very quick and basic render in Keyshot, like that. I would compile a mood board of parts, pieces from Google searches and images of images of garages that I knew I could insert into the visual. And you end up with this. And if you look over to the left where that vice is, that's actually one of part of my painting. And so my style now is this. It's rendered, but it's also painted on top of, because I get told, and maybe some of you will agree with this, is that they find the photoreal renders a bit cold and are lacking any sort of heart, and they like seeing the sketching. So I like to do kind of like a photoreal material and lighting pass, and then get in there on top and paint quite loosely. So when you kind of look at it, it does look like a detailed image, but when you inspect it, there's still a lot of life to it, and it's quite loose in places. If I'm not going the full kind of render and model route, I will just render an interior. And these are paintings in Photoshop, so I will actually paint what I need to put in there. The toolboard on the back is a photo texture, but I'll use the lasso tool to get these straight edges in Photoshop, and then use texture brushes to paint in very, very quickly. The bike, these were some product placement bikes that we were getting from the manufacturer, and I had to dress them up a bit to kind of make them look like they were going to be tactical bikes. So this is the finished bit of concept art. So again, it's this balance of render, paintings, but an accurate set size. Another great thing that I was using this a lot on Die Hard, which was staging the action. And there was going to be this stunt scene in Spectre where Bond's car comes off, at the end, the car chase ends by the car coming off and doing this jump and ending up in the river. And using SketchUp and I think an Aston Martin, which was actually on the warehouse, to be able to kind of position the camera to get a good dynamic shot, render it, and then paint it up. And this process is very, very quick for me to do now. And this is it. So that's the concept art, but they put the camera there in the movie, so kind of close. And again, this is an example of my workflow when I'm needing to do something fast. Is I'll get some assets from the workshop, so from the warehouse, get them into the position that I want, find the camera angle I want. That's a raw. That's how it comes out in the render, and I think would make a lot of you go like, ugh. But as an illustrator, to paint on top of that, it's done a lot of the hard work for me. So I'm able to kind of put in a bit of dynamism and action and sparks, a few lens flares, and it's I got a good keyframe. Same as this. So this is the concept art that I painted over a SketchUp model that one of the art directors had designed, and we were going to make on the location in Switzerland. And this is how they proposed the plane to come out the back of as it crashes through, and this is how it was in the movie. So pretty close. Animation in Key Shot. There was the scene where Bond's getting tortured. Was the first time I'd actually tried to animate anything, and they'd asked me to do it, so I stupidly said yes, and then sat there with YouTube videos and some information on how to do it. But it was interesting because I could take that SketchUp model and then make it move. So this is the SketchUp model of the torture device. If you ever find, this is a model of a guy from 3D Warehouse. And it's actually a really quite detailed model, genitalia included if you remove his shorts. So this is the, again, render of the model. And this is a quick time of the animation. And I found this quite exciting, again, because I still don't see myself as a 3D person. I really do enjoy doing the 2D illustration, but seeing this ability to bring these very, very quick SketchUp models to life and started giving me a lot of ideas later, which I'm going to show you at the end of this talk. At the time, they were going to go in and sort of do stuff to his eyes. Oh, beg your pardon, it was Key Shot.
With your sight, your hearing, and your balance. Just with the subtlest of manipulations.
We'll get on with it then. Nothing can be as painful as listening to you talk.
All right. Let's begin.
And it had to be really reminiscent of a dentist drill, which is also why it's got that noise, which makes you go, ah. Okay, life. This is interesting because I'm working with a designer called Nigel Phelps. And he didn't like the look of the ISS space station, so we were doing this kind of stylized interpretation of it. And we were breaking down the ISS into these compartments that we needed to build and shoot on a soundstage, and using this sort of reference that he provided us, I was then given the model of the set, which was made in Rhino by a set designer, and I would start dressing it into the set. So I was given the shell, and then all of the boxes and the dressing that you see there. This is what I'm providing, as well as kind of various details of posts and cables and things that you were going to see. We were given this mood board of lighting reference that were actually taken by an astronaut as kind of a style and lighting guide for the color palette. So I would get this view, and the designer did not want me to go near that photoreal render. He was a traditionalist, he liked marker pens, so he wanted me to just do these loose, traditional Photoshop paintings. And this is something interesting. If you ever work in film, you might hear this, or some of you might resonate with it, is that if you provide someone with a photoreal rendering, you don't give them any option to bring anything to the table. It's cooked, it's done, and this is what you're given. Whereas with these kind of illustrations, there's still a bit of room for interpretation. So again, turn it around to the other way, do these paint overs. The looser, the better. So this was taking me back to my speed painting days in Photoshop. I'd be given a day. to do it. So kind of find the angles and start painting them up. Sometimes they're a little bit faster, but depending on how complex the image is, usually about a day. Yeah, so I start about eight in the morning, and once I finish kind of faffing around and stuff. It depends, because sometimes you sort of stretch the work to fit the day, and other times it's the other way around, and you're really under the gun to get stuff done. But on the whole, I try to give myself about a day for an image, or maybe two, but usually a day.
So the workflow is screenshot or export
Yeah, sorry.
into Photoshop?
I beg your pardon?
So the workflows, you grab that, either export it as something?
Yes, and just paint straight on top of it. Straight on top of it, which is how I used to do it before I got hold of Keyshot. And it was how I used to do it before I got hold of SketchUp in a way, because I would just be painting that. And SketchUp just provided a way to be very, very accurate with what you saw. Because I used to paint things and I'd be asked, how high is that wall? And I go, about that. And now with SketchUp, I can say 10 feet. So seeing this in terms of like how this came out, I've got
After
some
striking
clip
debris
here.
program non-responsive. Inbound on collision course with ISS. Initiating emergency course correction and manual retrieval.
Canada, I'm online. Transferring control to wireless.
Station to control. Initiating sequence.
Affirmative.
Solar committee.
You let me worry about the committee. Where's Rory? He is at risk out there.
Easy, folks. Mics are live. Ready, show?
Thrust is up.
Cool. So there's this scene which is supposed to be in the laboratory where they're examining this bit of alien life that they had found on a meteorite. And again, I would just do a screen grab of the view in SketchUp and paint over the top. And by now, the looser I made that work and more expressive, the better it sat with him. So it was quite a nice change actually to really kind of get back into painting again. So these were an example of the view and the extent of the detail in that set. And also the alien gets in there and does something mean to the rat. So we had to design this rat cage. And the designer really liked the look of SketchUp, just the UI. And he was like, don't just give me that. And it's nice, and it's very pleasing to look at, very clean, very graphic. And something that you're noticing now with the ease and ability of like a one-click photoreal render to kind of get it back to something that is just very, very simple, and you're not seducing a client with finish. You can really clearly see the design, and if the design works here, it's going to work in the workshop and it's going to work on the screen. And again, could push into the rat box. And here I am again, I've got some space underneath, so I will export some elevations. And here I can use the measuring tool to get some overalls and then get that down to the workshop where they get it made. And we had a stunt rat and a dummy rat, and I don't know which one that was. Yeah. So there was this was a incubator, and here's the reference of it on the ISS. And this is me designing it and kind of making it look all techie, doing what I do. And I had this idea, because I knew that they'd be looking at a petri dish, and rather than this petri dish being sat on just one plate in this thing, I had this idea of it kind of lifting up a little bit. So it being on this little table that would separate, and it would be backlit, and it would have calibration marks on it. And even though he didn't like photoreal rendering, I couldn't help but just do a quick one for myself here. So a friend of mine's a graphic designer, so I told him what I wanted him to do, because he would then get this off down to the workshop as a vector file where they could etch into plexiglass, and we could put a LED strip around the edge, and this is how you get these lit calibration marks. Who's seen this film, by the way?
Wake up.
I'll have you all know it's not about the alien, it's about it's all about my incubator, and they ignore the alien. Look at the light box and the calibration marks, okay? Ignore everything else.
I'm gonna try and pull my hand out.
Do that, but just make sure to protect the glove.
And the funny thing was, I would see this.
Okay.
I would see this being built, but watching it in the cinema would actually it would make me tense.
How hard is it holding on to you?
Like a firm handshake.
It's fine.
It doesn't hurt, but it's firm, strong.
What's the problem? It's got Hugh's hand.
His heart rate is at 165.
Sure. Can we trust the glove?
It's very tight.
Glove's not going anywhere, it's fine.
Okay, but just relax. Tell him to relax.
Derry?
Tell him to
Derry,
calm
look at
down.
me. Look at me. Relax. Just relax your hand. Okay.
It's in between my fingers.
Can I make a suggestion? Can I go in there and get
No,
him?
you're not going to go
Bring
in
him
there.
back
No,
out
of course
where
you're not,
it's safe?
because we have
Why
to
not?
maintain quarantine.
No, I can
Stop.
do this. I can. I can do this.
Can you try and distract it?
Yes. I'll see if I can interest it in the wand. Come on, my favorite little Martian. Come on. Come on. Come on. Come on. Oh. He lost interest. Hold my hand.
You? Hey, you!
What the f*** is going on?
No one's going in.
Come on.
Wait.
Who's going in? Wait for I'm going in there.
Language, by the way.
Damn.
I'll skip that on. It's quite intense, but it's funny how like it can be. It's I was watching that in the cinema and I was completely disengaged from the fact that I'd seen that thing down in the workshop repeatedly, and I'd seen him on set. That what they were using was a piece of blue tack, and so like when it works, because I saw that in the cinema and I was like, oh god, and I didn't get to do like that's my thing in there. Look, I did that. So I'm going to try and speed up a little bit here because I've only got 13 minutes left. I've got a few more things to show you. I had to design the incubator units that the crew slept in. And again, you know this process well, so a quick sketch into Photoshop. I'd also bring it into Keyshot to demonstrate how I thought the... oh no, I'm unable to play video. Where's that? Okay, well that was another animation that I generated in Keyshot to be able to show how those doors worked. And again, I would do these renders and then paint on top of it. I would paint in their sleeping bag, providing the elevations on the side as well. Again, just kind of compositionally it helps, but also gives more information as to the kind of thing that you're designing here. Some set photos. Not set photos, these are workshop photos of it being built. And then you go down to the set and you'd see them there, which was, and this is always such a big payoff, because all the little details that you're putting into the model and into the design, to actually see them there on the set is really cool. There's no finger breaking in this, that's all right. You can watch it.
I haven't had a chance to say that.
Thank you. I think these will prove to be the greatest days of my life.
And they had to be made very secure, like a self-contained little unit that were going to protect them, especially for... Come on. especially when that's chasing you. So after publishing a lot of this stuff online, I was getting a lot of requests to demonstrate or publish how I was doing this stuff. So as a little demo and a shameless plug, I do have some tutorials out there, but nodding to the animations that I started generating in Keyshot. Once I built the model, I started doing these little test animations. And I had the idea to be like, oh, it'd be really cool if I did a little trailer, kind of like a music video to promote these. So a few long evenings and tutorials on the internet and downloading a track and then listening to the track and then imagining how I was going to cut this stuff to the music that I had downloaded. I generated these tutorials. So I generated these trailers. And this I still find really exciting because I can build this stuff super fast in SketchUp using a couple of plugins and just basically some really simple, textbook modeling procedures. Animate them, bring them into After Effects, and oh no, that's. And we'll just put these up on YouTube and social media as just a quick little trailer. But I really enjoyed creating those. So every model I do now, I start thinking about like, well, I'll explain that one. I start thinking about like, well, how can I push it? What else can I do past doing the design, doing the model, doing the render? Let's really bring it to life. And as well as doing the tutorial on how to model that, I wanted to put it into an environment like this because I like putting it into some context. So taking that model, I showed how I would put stuff, how I would set it into an environment. And again, it was an excuse to generate these short clips of animation within Keyshot and, come on, behave. And cut them together in After Effects with a soundtrack. So I decided to do something that was a little more complicated and more intricate. And like I was saying to Mike earlier, I'm a really, really big fan of Chris Cunningham, who directed the Bjork All Is Full of Love video. And you're going to see some similarities in that where it's shot against a lit background and there's a kind of 70s retro feel to it. And I wanted to create a set that would enable me to pull off a similar sort of sequence of shots that I could put into a trailer. So in a way, I made a tutorial as an excuse to do the trailer because I'm really getting into doing these trailers. So this is, and the great thing about doing them, the sets as detailed as I do, using components and all the modeling methodologies that that I apply to my scenes, I can do this stuff really quickly, and then do these renders and generate these pieces of art, but also get these trailers. Sorry? Audio Jungle.
And that's the end.